Hello? Hello, Melissa?
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello. I love how Zoom tells you now when you're recording.
Yes. It's kind of like one of those sci-fi movies. Your oppression is official. Always having trouble connecting to audio. Oh well. I'm admitting everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Connor. I am Executive Director of the Canadian Open Data Society, and welcome to our June webinar, Entrepreneurship and Intrapreneurship through Open Data. We're just going to give people a few minutes for the digital commute, and I will then introduce people. Hopefully everyone can see what's on the screen right now, the title slide. And I'm just admitting people from the waiting room, so please stand by. Oh, and I should also add, and probably should do so again when more people have joined, that this meeting is being recorded so that people who couldn't make it at this particular time and date can enjoy it later on YouTube, as it were. Bob, have we got you on the line? Oh, can't hear you. Bob, you're muted or silent. Mm-mm. Ah. Okay. Just give it 2 more minutes and then we're off to the races. Oh, we have a good fraction of those who registered are already on the line, so we're just about ready to go. All right. Once again, my name is Paul Connor. I'm Executive Director of the Canadian Open Data Society, welcoming you to our June webinar, Entrepreneurship and Intrapreneurship through Open Data. Now, as always, we have a little disclaimer for the lawyers. Basically, that whenever we talk about something, it involves a large aspect of personal judgment, and this is a rapidly changing and evolving field, so it's a moving target. So we always advise you to consult with a professional before taking any decisions that are company changing or life changing. Not that I expect too much in that regard typically, but we always have to say that. I will now introduce the society. I won't read this off for you. You can see it, our vision, mission, and value proposition. Our vision is basically an open data society in small letters. We think that having as much open data coming not just from the government, as is classically known, but as from private business and from the nonprofit sector, from civil society, and as timely a manner as possible, is really going to improve outcomes in terms of prosperity and justice. And we think we have a valuable proposition to our members, so I'll be giving you a little pitch to join at the end of the webinar, and hope you find that this webinar includes some value for you. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter who's on the line, Bob Lytle, founder of Rel8ed.to Analytics, a growing technology company in Niagara, Canada and Buffalo, USA, bringing big and open data and due diligence to financial, insurance, and government markets. And with that, I will ask Bob to take it away.
Paul, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I want to make sure I'm on the phone, which is better than the computer for volume. But we'll see how it goes, and let me know. Just raise your hand if you can't hear me at any point during this. So I do want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I sit today. Pay my respects to the elders past and present. Extend that respect to specifically the Potawatomi tribe of the Illinois area. Some might call it Chicago. So it's great to see everybody here today. I'm going to present my screen and really would like to ask for a lot of interactivity in the discussion today, if you guys are willing, because I'd like to share a little bit about what Rel8ed.to does and then really get into some of your questions on how you might be able to do the same. Let me know when you can see my screen, Paul.
I believe I can see it now. Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. So thank you, Paul, for the introduction. I'm Bob Lytle, and I run Rel8ed.to Analytics. So I feel happy that we started our company in Canada, now have branched out around the world. Paul and Connie and several of you on the phone were among our first contacts and connections, and sometimes customers in the Canadian operation. Our company sits in Niagara, Canada. We also have a Buffalo, New York office and a Chicago office. And I think at least coverage on the African continent and the Asian continent now. So we have truly a global workforce, and it's exciting to be with you today. What I wanted to talk with you about is very quickly what our company does with open data. And then we'll go into 3 specific examples of what we've been doing for that. And I'd like to see if we can translate that to what some of you are doing, whether you are in the business of releasing open data, maybe exploring what it's about and how to use it, or maybe even considering starting a business. What's interesting for me is the techniques we use don't have to be about commercial endeavor. It has to be about thinking through interesting research opportunities. Where do I find the data, and then how do I use it? So let's get started. As a company, what we do is find, clean, curate, and analyze public information, primarily open data. I'll go into some details on some of the non-open data that we use and some of the what we would call publicly accessible, but not open data. Our job is to find it, to gather it, to clean it, to make some sense out of it, and then to help our customers understand the market, maybe talk about this and build content, to analyze it, to visualize it, or to perform investigations. So today I'm going to go over 3 specific examples of how we've found data, how we've modified that, how we've given that to our customers, public or private customers, and what they do with it. And maybe that fosters some interesting discussion. So I won't get into much technology today, but the one thing that I want you to understand is we deal in business information primarily, and some human information, and we deal in that information in what's called a graph. And a graph is a way to think about data as connections between data points. If a traditional database is about rows, a graph is about, we call them bubbles, right? But circles of information that might have a linkage to somewhere else. So this example simply is businesses in a manufacturing sector linked with each other as competitors or suppliers. Within a business on the right, you see Pratt & Whitney Canada linked with its phone numbers and the people maybe involved in that business who own the business. And then further down the line, you know, how do you contact those people? The only thing on this sheet that is not open data is that Facebook account. You call that public information, that John Wizalewski has a following Facebook address. Everything else came from a government data source. And this is what we've built starting in Canada and then moving around the world. We're now in, I think the count is about 120 countries of data. We have a team going to Asia. There's a Singapore trade show in a couple of weeks, and we're announcing our launch in the Asian market with both People's Republic of China, who does have open data, and then most of Asia Pacific. So it's exciting to grow, but it's also exciting to know that this data is accessible to everyone. What we do is find it and then find ways to connect it. And so you see some of the examples of things that are open. Everything on this list, with the exception of a very few things which are modeled, comes from some government source, some public source. So take a look at what it is, everything from stock, announcements to companies that are dissolving or growing, taking a look at what's in the market, what the company sells. I can go to a Canadian contract database and see every product that IBM releases to the Canadian government. And now I have that data and I can do something with it. What they do, are they certified? A challenge in Canada in the upper right is some data is available in certain markets, like the United States has a woman and minority business and a minority business database. It's freely available. It helps people purchase from women and minority businesses. In Canada, we actually don't have that capability. It's not an open data set. So companies like ours come in and find different mechanisms to be able to help companies work with women-owned business, as an example. So you see down this list, it's just a bunch of info. Our job and what we built a team to do is to find it, make sure that it's trusted and put it together, and then help customers use it. And that's what we'll go into. So a couple of examples of things that are interesting and maybe a little curious, as we always like to use the word. I didn't know that was out there. So here's an example of a data set. This in this case is an Ontario government data set on construction permits. So we can see here a company in Lively, Ontario, 1469872 Ontario, and they have 6 or 7 construction permits from the Minister of the Environment. That's interesting, and if you're curious, you might go and look and say, oh, somebody's building a house. What we would do with this is help an insurance company look at this firm and say they're growing because they have 4 permits 2 years ago, and they've just signed up for another 12 permits this year. So this bid is a business projection, right? The trend is that this company is growing. And maybe it's important or maybe it's unimportant. Where is that permit for? Is it a house or this and that? All I know is I have now a company that's growing and doing more than what they were doing before. Here's a very interesting one from the city of Vancouver. And it presents some opportunities and challenges. Vancouver requires you to license yourself as a dog walker. So Vancouver dog walking licenses is a data set that you can get from the Vancouver municipal site. And now I can see, obviously, there's a company called Lytle, which looks like it's a person. Apparently, it's called Instinct to Heal, which I think is a clever name in and of itself. And Lytle is allowed to walk dogs for a fee in Vancouver. So that's interesting. Now, maybe for me, I'm interested in building a database of dog walkers, or maybe I'm a business that is interested in understanding, both from a who's in the market and from the employee base, do people have side jobs? So this is now where it becomes a little bit interesting, right? Because the open data set makes it very clear that Lytle is a dog walker. If Lytle worked for the city of Vancouver, one of the restrictions may be you have to report all of your side businesses. Did Lytle report her side business as a dog walker? Yes or no? Somebody in human resources might look at that. And so we sit here and think, oh, glorious open data. We have to think of the other side. Is there a regulatory framework in which you could use this data or are prohibited from using this data? This is the deeper aspect. And one of the things that I find employing a lot of people from different universities, interns, is that folks coming into the market are highly skilled from a technical perspective, but they don't always have kind of the worldly view of what's right, what is ethical, and what are the rules. And so a big part of our job is not just finding the data, but helping customers understand the rules on what can be used and what should be used or what should be redacted, as an example. But here you go. This is an open data set. Go visit LA. Here's another interesting one. If you live in Toronto, there's a data set called Dine safe, and dine safe and body safe are used to govern the inspections and release that data. It's one of the best data sets in North America for this. Every day, we can get an update on every inspection that's going on. And in this case, all in hair salon, at some point had 3 fines for something going on in the thing. Maybe, you know, combs needed to be washed. I don't know for sure. But this is a public service. You can actually go into restaurants today and see posters. Hey, check us out on Dine Safe. Body Safe allows you as a consumer to understand if there are risks or things that are interesting. We, as a company, we don't get involved as much in thinking of good or bad hair salons, but there are customers that have interest in understanding, is one of my clients running into a difficulty? Maybe they need some help. Maybe there's something we can do to give them better safety protocols. That would be the kind of thing folks hire us for. So we talk about curious data in our company. The goal for us is always what's interesting, what's available, what am I allowed to do with it? And then we gather it and connect it together. Eventually, a customer is going to come, in our case, or a public institution will come and ask, you know, do you have this kind of information? It's been a lot of fun for us as a 5-year-old company to say, I've seen that before. We know where to find that. Let's go and look at this together. Will this help you? It's a great way to be an entrepreneur, and doesn't have to be for commercial purposes. You could do this in your own job internally as a private individual or as someone in a government department. So let's talk about just briefly how we find data, where we go to look for it, and what we might do with it. So we think of data in classifications, or what we call rankings or ratings, in terms of trustability, and then also in terms of what we can use. And you see here, there's a lot of information. We'd love to start with the concept of open data. And so we might go to a data.gov as an example, which is a United States data site, or open data from Canada, Open Canada CA. This is actually the first site that launched our company in Canada. And inside here, I can ask for anything and it will tell me. I might type in business licenses or climate change report, and it's going to give me a data set that I can then go and dig into. Most likely, it's in some sort of machine readable format. If you're in Canada, it's much more likely than in some other countries, right? So if I'm looking for climate change, and I'm going to go in here and I will find both information on regulations, but also here's a CSV with climate change investments by business characteristics. What kinds of companies invest in climate change? And this is a very recent data set. We're actually doing some work with a global customer on this exact thing. Find me companies that are into climate change. And let me talk about those, because our customer might be more interested in seeing that. I think I just took the French one, which, with your permission, I think I'll take the English one just to make it a little bit easier for us. So this abstract, the CSV, I can grab it, I can open this file down, and it's going to tell me investments in climate change technologies. It's perfect, right? Now, I'm an investigator, I'm a reporter, I'm a curious person, I'm a climate change advocate or a climate change fighter, it doesn't matter. The fact is, I have some data that now, as a Canadian, I can use and do something with. I think it's very cool, right? So what we spend our time doing is just finding this stuff. We get a lot of information in the open space. We do have the notion of finding information on websites. So the distinction between open data and public, as you can see it, open is it's been licensed to be used for whatever purposes there are. Public data is often licensed for use for different purposes. And so we do take some public data. There's some public data that we don't take because we can't. It's got a copyright restriction, right? On the internet side, we might have things like Yelp ratings or TripAdvisor. And within certain parameters, all of those companies actually release their data, whether it's as open or as freely available, or sometimes we pay for it, depending on what our customers want. a great example of data that anybody can get, and you get it hundreds, sometimes thousands of times a day. I look at my daughter's web logs thousands of times a day, looking at websites, right? And what's on the website. Always important to understand what you can do with it. But the fact is, all that information is available. We get into the far right here. This is some of the data we work on. And again, you can use this too, whether you're in business or not. Things like who is. One of the data sets we purchase is about $1,000. It's every website in the world, updated once a month. And it's the URL of the website. So I can tell you how many websites are in China or in South Africa. We build technologies to go and read the websites like Google might do to understand that. That's a data set that for our business is a valuable purchase, right? Some of you may be heavily involved in mapping. Geocoding is usually a paid service. You say, here's an address. Can you tell me where it is on the map? Right? That's the sort of thing as well. And then there are companies, unlike ours, that do work in selling data. And sometimes you may find that you use that data for certain point purposes. We do. And again, the restrictions from left to right are much higher to much lower, right? So you have to think about that too. But it all is out there for you to be able to touch and use. One more look before we get into our examples is the kind of data that we get and use. We talked about restricted versus this, just some different examples. On the open side, right? Government registries. Canada releases every day businesses that have started, businesses that have shut down, right? Quebec has a very vibrant register. We have open data that is not a business registry, but rather is something that is free for the public to understand and use. We looked at this, the food checks, right? The Financial Service Commission will tell you every financial advisor in Canada and whether their customers have filed a complaint against them. It's a valuable open data set if I'm looking for somebody to help me with my investments. We talked about the public APIs and then the commercial internet. Again, always important to understand what you're allowed to do with the data, but it's quite possible that the data you wish to use is available for you and is free, right? So this is one of the great hallmarks of the open data, is that you can build a business or you can build a use case without spending the money on acquiring the data. You will spend time and effort, sometimes money, in fixing it and cleaning it. I'll show you some examples of that. So I just asked the team this morning to say, show me what we've loaded over the last few days. And if you just see a broad list, this is the top 10 things that have been loaded. You see yesterday we loaded 3,900 corporations from Saskatchewan. City of Chicago, 2 days ago, had 177. I can tell you from practice, in Chicago, Illinois, 177 businesses opened on Monday. That's pretty amazing. Guess what? The same thing in Calgary. There were 45 in Calgary. In New York, there were 99. Toronto had 55. So even just that one piece of information, who cares what the business is? There were 55 businesses that opened their doors on Monday in Toronto. That's pretty amazing, right? And of course, here we go. In Nashville, we had 8 beer permits. Well, that's awesome. So they're obviously doing some summer drinking in Nashville, opening up a sidewalk cafe. You get the idea. This data is every one of these items is an open data source with the exception of one, and is freely accessible for you. You find it, you grab it, you download it, and you learn something. So with that in mind, I wanted to talk with you about 3 different use cases. We'll look at a public policy use case. We'll look at a disaster management use case, and we will look at a fraud use case. And I wanted to take a pause first. Paul, I'm sure we want to invite people to ask questions on the webinar here. So did you want to introduce how they can do that?
Well, we already have a question in the chat, and anyone else is welcome to place a question in the chat. Connie's asking, does the Canada Open Government team know that this was what launched you? I'm just reading it off.
Thank you, Connie. I don't know. I do know our friends at Ontario. We spent a lot of time together, and they're well aware of this. So I think it's fun that we've been able to build such a great relationship with a lot of different public entities in our journey. And we've gotten a lot of encouragement. Now this is not about starting a business, but if you ever ask me, why did we start our business in Canada? It's precisely because of the care and attention that the public sector applies to businesses. Guaranteed. You have a smarter, easier, better time starting a business in Canada than just about any other country I've come into contact with. So there's an editorial.
That's very nice to hear.
As an American who is a PR in Canada, I will tell you that hands down.
That's awesome. Thanks, Bob. Any other questions from our guests today? We can, you can always type it in and we can circle back again a little later on.
Perfect.
But looks like we can proceed.
We'll have some waypoints during the discussion here, but I want to show you, just 5 minutes each, maybe just 3 different use cases that we found very interesting, curious sometimes, and kind of invigorating us to go forward more. So the first is public policy analysis, and 2 come to mind as I was thinking about this. One of the things that's interesting for Canada, this is 2018, we opened up in Canada retail cannabis maybe earlier than they did in the States. So the experience in the Canadian market in terms of businesses that open and when did they open in that industry, I think was very instructive for several United States regions who also decided to open up, or in the case of Buffalo or New York, still considering, right? So what we were asked to do was to take a look at all the licenses in Canada for cannabis. You have growers and you have a few of those, but you see here, there's an awful lot more. We don't have 1,200 growers because what we found is it's not just the people who grow this product, but it's the people who grow it, who sell it, who transport it, who prescribe it. And if you go down the chain, the actual industry for this particular market is a lot bigger than what we think it is. There's a couple hundred, 300 producers, if you will. And so taking a broader look for us as a business in the lawyers who tend to register cannabis businesses, the security companies that provide security when you're driving product from one city to another, those are also part of the ecosystem. And for us, the business licenses don't cover that. So somebody said, tell me cannabis in Canada, open data would tell you a portion. If you look deeper, open data will actually tell you a much richer and broader market. So these are fun for us to do sometimes as experiments. I know this data was used also. There were some debates in Niagara region about how to open and where should we open retail. This is probably a year and a half ago. And so they actually used a map and they went in and said, okay, where are things located and where can this go? So those are fun projects to work on. Something not fun but powerful was work we were asked to do last year for assessing the impact of COVID on business closures. So this dashboard was put together based 100% on open data at the back end with, in this case, a company like IDC. They're a popular, powerful research firm. They look at businesses and what they spend on technology. And so we put a dashboard that merged our business data with their technology data to be able to talk to people about what is going to happen. This was actually put together in April of last year. So the idea was, if you are interested in how much people are going to spend on IT, it's an interesting question, or what is the impact on employees, right? These are all the businesses in Canada by sector, construction companies, and what impact they're going to have if COVID causes a shutdown. So medium impact or high impact, and what's going to be the impact in a specific area of the country. And so to be able to go deep, this one doesn't show the businesses, it shows aggregations, but you can see in this postal code, there are 75 businesses impacting 300 employees at high risk of a layoff because we've canceled this thing. So this data set was actually put out for free for the purpose of kind of helping people understand how cool IDC was in terms of their market and their capabilities. So for us as an open data company to be able to apply our info on the businesses underneath a powerful research company's kind of proprietary know-how shows how open data plus closed data can still provide value. In their market, it provided a lot of value to their customers who now can, figure out how to tune their laptop sales or whatever things that they do. These are fun projects, but they also have a kind of a public policy bent. For us, the challenge to go in and get it right, if I'm zooming in and looking at specific areas of the market, what's happening in Calgary, or what's happening in a specific area of Alberta, where are the businesses, where is the impact for small or large businesses? It makes us feel proud of what we've been able to put together, but also hopeful that other folks can take the same sort of data and do maybe even more interesting things with it. So those are two things that a public policy or a public agency might use to kind of do projections or understand where to put things or understand the impacts. Obviously, we've all lived so much through COVID, I almost hesitated putting this up there, but it is a great example of how you can take plain old government data and turn it into something kind of neat. So there you go. Let's take a pause before we jump into the next one and see if we have any questions. Or any commentary maybe on this sort of thing.
Yep. Ushnish has asked, does the open data on closures include nonprofit corporations as well?
Ours did. Now, this particular dashboard doesn't have a slot for nonprofit, so there's an other that's kind of hidden, but the core data set does. Now, you don't get the nonprofits in the same way that you get for-profit corporations. The federal level has that, but there's also a great set of reports coming out of the CRA for nonprofits specifically. If you ask from our business, we care, but we don't care. It's an entity. It's a business. It's nonprofit or for-profit. That's just a flag, if you will. Everything else works exactly the same way.
We have another question. Interesting to see used the Canadian postal codes. Did you have to pay for those?
Connie. So here's a question. Is that open with a capital O or a lowercase o? Here's what we know. We actually use only the FSA, which is the 3-digit front part of the postal code, which is often delivered in the data sets. We don't pay for those. There was a great interesting, I would say, legal ruling about whether that data is truly closed or opened or halfway. We don't spend a lot of time with postal codes because we don't do a lot with mailing. We've tended to move towards geocodes, but postals still have their place, especially when you look at mapping software, because it wants to put things into zones and buckets.
Thank you. We are aware with the Society's Advocacy Committee about this sort of legal gray area, you might say, how we might advocate about it.
Got it. Okay, I see a note on background noise. Are we still getting that, Carol?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, we can hear you very clearly, but it will take some cleanup. Yeah.
All right, got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's move to some other things, and we'll talk about another use case. And this is one that's emerging for us, but it's an exciting opportunity, open data for emergency management. And you would think, and many of us maybe are in public sector, the government releases a lot of data, but the government is quite large and doesn't always know what somebody else is releasing. And in the case of the United States, where you have 50 different operating states or provinces, and within there you've got hundreds of different municipalities, the problem gets exponentially bigger. It's a problem in Canada. It's an even bigger problem in the States. And so envision being in a position where there's a storm coming, maybe Hurricane Hugo, maybe it's somebody knows that an earthquake has occurred, or maybe it's a risk situation, maybe a riot. The typical response from government is to do public safety. Public safety, let's get on site, let's go and help people figure out what's going on, move traffic or so on. What are the things that you need to know for that? Well, I need to know where to put my trucks. I need to know where to put my I need to know where to have my my workers sleep, right? Where should they eat? You know, simple things like that. These are base things, right? I have to know where to go on a map. What am I supposed to do? Now, what do any of us do? We pick up our cell phone and we go and look in Google Maps. What if it's a hurricane and the internet's down? What do you look at? Any one of us are stuck, right? At the government, they can't afford to be stuck. Emergency management can't, well, sorry, I couldn't Google this, so I guess we couldn't get the people to the right place. So governments around the world say, I need a backup plan. Backup plan is to say, I have a database of everything, right? And you know what? In a crisis, here you go, pull it out. Maybe it's a CD-ROM, for goodness sakes. Now, let's put this in the hands of folks, and let's say, here's every business everywhere, and let's go and figure out where to buy a generator, where to park my trucks, where to shelter people, where's the stadium. Things that seem simple actually aren't simple in a crisis. So emergency management asks that. So the question is, where do I go? I mean, it's envision. We have a database. It's exciting. A database, you can go and look at that. But how do you know what data is right? And this becomes an issue of data cleansing and also data smarts. And so here's one example. Here's a company, Polymer International Corp. And Intertape Polymer. This is in Florida. You say, well, that's great. I'll bet these guys have plastics, and I'll bet they have trucks that we can use, and I'll bet they've got someplace overhead where we can put our people, right, in case of a storm, because it's a big manufacturer. We know it's a big manufacturer, right? Well, there you go. They're headquartered in Sarasota, Florida. Beautiful headquarters, great office building, pretty park, probably some geese or something sitting on top of there. Am I going to get any disaster management capability there? No, it's closed. It doesn't have any value for me. And, you know, who knows? Maybe I can buy a sandwich at the cafe if it's open. It's probably not. We had a hurricane. What we need to know is, where is their biggest building? Where are they located? And this is where open data comes in. Bottom left-hand corner, Microsoft releases as open data every footprint of every building in North America. Go to Google Maps, look up and go down, and you can see the outline of the building. Well, guess what? If I can figure out that this 230,000 square foot building is my warehouse, the real record I care about for Intertape Polymer isn't the one on the right, it's the one on the left. And so our job becomes not just to say, here's a bunch of businesses, but here's a bunch of businesses with a lot of space where you can park your truck. In an emergency, boy, that sounds mundane. In regular life, in an emergency, it's critical. And that becomes an open data exercise. Data from one place, data from another place, put it together, and now you've got something interesting. So here's another one. We've had a train derail in Chicago, and I'm concerned whether or not I have hazardous waste that either is going to be spilled, or there's a place and there's a location that has some risk in it. There's a building that has risk. So I'm going to go to the EPA, and I'm going to go and look at every hazardous materials license. I'm going to say, okay, that's going to help me. If I asked any of us, I forgot and thought on here, what is the number one place that has hazardous materials? You might say manufacturers or chemical plants, right? You can see a couple of these. It's interesting. The Meat Authority. The number one place in Chicago that has hazardous materials is retail trade. Who would have thought? I would have had no idea. If you, as an emergency management entity, need to avoid hazardous material or watch what's going to happen, protect a particular area to protect the populace, you're not going and looking at retail trade as your first place, but you probably should be. And so the idea for the open data space is to say, I've got one piece of information, but linked together with everything else we can learn about these companies, this is actually where we would put a stronger and a better focus. So this emergency management is kind of a niche use case, but look at what we did, right? We said, hey, Microsoft, give me a building footprint. Florida, give me a business license. Let's mingle it together. You know, EPA or Environment Canada, tell me who's got a license for this. Let's go back and link that up with some other data to say, okay, now I see what this business is really about. So these are two examples among many that you could do. The emergency management, I think, is interesting because it's real time, it's near time, and it has kind of a large impact on individuals, which is why these are some of our favorite projects to work on. So I'll take a pause to see if there's anything else that we want to talk about before we merge into the last one. I see that. So this last use case is interesting. I realize now, Paul, that we've done almost all public policy, which is fun, right? But conceptually, this applies to business as well. One of the things that is released really all around the world are, kind of court records, and some of them are open, some of them are partially open. I know there was a big deal in Canada not too long ago where the province of BC was releasing all of the court records, and then they stopped, right? And all the businesses, all the law firms just went crazy about this, right? So in this case, though, it's almost a sure thing that the data inside a court record is not the full story. And so think of yourself as an investigative journalist right now. So this particular one, this is a real court case we were asked to look at and ask, could the data in the open space help answer this question? So here's a dressmaker, it was actually an importer, was importing dresses from Vietnam, I think. And they were underclaiming the data in terms of how much it was worth. Therefore, they were paying less in taxes. I'm not going to tell you who asked us to look at this, but it's not a business. Let's put it that way. So this company, Dana Kay, they actually got hit $10 million suit because they were underclaiming, the value of the dresses they were importing. Okay, and the state's attorney got excited about that and so on. We had a couple of people or entities that were connected to this lawsuit or this stipulation, and they got hit. There was a court case you can see here, right? And the state's attorney for Southern District went and fined these three organizations. The question that they asked was, we think there was more, but we couldn't find it. Could you help me find more about this particular case? So what we found and shared with the organization, but this really wasn't three companies and a couple of business owners. It was actually 13 companies, 24 people, 2 other countries, right? And a whole bunch of other data. And you see this linkage between all this. I'll go into some detail so you can see it. They got the tip of the iceberg, and this happens often. But the question is, can open data help us find more? And it's all about, can you connect together different pieces of information? It takes some sleuthing, but guys, this is what newspaper reporters do. I found this, and then I asked this question, and I found this. It is 100% true that the open data that is being released around the world can assist in those investigations. So here's what we found. So here are the 3 players. You saw them, Dana Kay, and then the business owners, and this is good. These are the people who committed the crime and did the time. Here's what we missed. The accountant who is connected, because the accountant has to file, the new company that was started 2 months after the fine was paid, they started another company, new addresses, shared addresses, property management, so several other companies. Now, I don't know anything about these folks here. What I will tell you, the only place less likely or more likely to be involved in money laundering is, first is a laundromat, interesting enough, and the second is property. So property is a great place to park your money if you're trying to hold on to it for something else. There's a property management organization. And guess what? You go further down the line, sometimes public, sometimes private. What we ended up finding was the webmaster who made the website for the new company also owned another company, and he wasn't a webmaster at all. This person was actually the kingpin, maybe, who knows, started another company importing from another country, Colombia. So we have 2 new importers, 3 new people. Here we go. There's another importer importing t-shirts from Mexico. And if you actually unearth that, this is not our job, but if you unearth it, my guess is you'd probably find some questions on the customs bill of lading. right? All of this is open data. There's one piece that wasn't, which is who is the webmaster. We had to buy the internet registry. I mentioned $1,000. That internet registry had this person's name on it. Okay. Found another person, found another company, and guess what? Oh, there's another court case for the same thing. So this has got to be one of the most frustrating things if you're in this business, is working on a case and then knowing somewhere linked together in some file cabinet over here is another thing that's going on that's the same that I haven't been able to put together. You know, what we do for a living is find ways to put that together. So the end result for a scenario like this is not about being a detective. The end result is asking, all the data that we just looked at was either an address, a phone number, a website, or a business owner. That's it. I don't want to make it too simplistic, but it's pretty straightforward. Figuring out how to connect it all together becomes the challenge, but once you do that, you now have a tool that in this case can prevent fraud and do some other good things as well. So, you know, we put together tools as a company to be able to let investigators search companies and understand, okay, there's some interesting other information. So these are the fun ones to talk about. I think I prefer as a business to do research or to do, you know, help businesses grow. But this is a valid use case for open data. And is one that I think it's particularly well suited to the more data that's released from government source. So with this, let's have some questions, because I think that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So we've got 15 minutes to chat some more.
Excellent. Bob, you actually sort of opened a vein here of intense interest among members of the society. Having, as you see in the comments, 100% transparency on corporate registers and directors is one of the interests of our advocacy committee. We were pleased to see the announcement by the Government of Canada that they will be opening their registry in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, but it's a start. And we know that a couple of other provinces are following in their footsteps, but there's still a long way to go. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And and Connie's talking about property ownership transparency as well. We definitely need that, especially in British Columbia. This has been identified as a locus for money laundering, along with casinos they have there. Now, I have a question here from Lee. How confident, and this goes back to your previous example, how confident in data quality are we when we say that people can park their truck in these building footprints, I take it? We know there is square footage, but the layout may not be great. Does the data extend to that level of detail?
The data can, but probably not open data. So what ends up happening is you put together this mix of public and private information. I mentioned on one of the earlier slides the concept of geocoding. Let's go back to that picture just so you can see it. The geocoding underlying this particular two sets of buildings is also smart enough. If you were to go to this on Google Maps, you'd see there's no other buildings around, right? So now I have two facts. It's a big building. There are no other buildings around, right? I had to pay a little bit, a tiny, tiny bit to be able to put that point on a map. I can say how far are these 2 points apart. Okay, so now big building, no other building around. The third question is, what do they do? Is it a shopping mall? Well, maybe you'll have a parking lot. That's not bad. But if I'm looking for a warehouse, the shopping mall is not going to help. So you identify what the company is in the business of doing. And sometimes that's released as part of open data. Sometimes companies like ours build, you know, artificial intelligence or other tools to be able to understand what a business does. We have a concept of a trainer, and that trainer lets humans kind of very quickly say, yep, that's a warehouse. Nope, that's a shopping mall. And then once you get enough pictures of that, I can then go and teach a computer to try to do that itself. So it's rarely one thing, and it's almost never one data set. That's what we've learned. This whole concept of connections related to each other is the whole notion of how you eventually answer that question, Lee.
Let me continue to invite commentary and questions from our audience. And then we'll come back to that trainer thing because that's something we have a bookmark to talk about. Anybody want to unmute themselves and have at it with Bob? This is your big chance. Raise your hand. I think you can raise your hand with this thing, can you? Okay, well, why don't we just continue on, as it were.
Ushnish, what would you like? I'm certain that we're going to be talking about business ownership or beneficial ownership. There you go, Shanish.
Okay, thanks. So just wondering if you found any differences between Canada and the US. Like we have much more stronger privacy protection laws, and there's been like all kinds of statements by the privacy commissioners about not linking data, especially for governments. And I'm wondering if you're coming across that the privacy protections we have in Canada as barriers to linking open data.
I prefer not to think of it as a barrier. I would prefer to say that it puts us in a position where we need to be smart and ask the question, should we be doing this? So the one thing you can say fairly about less governed data regimes, and the US is in the middle. I think there are some that have none. Canada would be higher, right? Europe would be higher, is that they value the individual as separate from the entity, the business entity. So there's a concept you're probably familiar with GDPR, that's the European framework. It's stronger even than Canada, PIPEDA. GDPR says there's a difference between a real person and a legal person. A real person is a human. It is us. It is us with certain inalienable rights. The Constitution protects us. Those real persons have the right to dispute the data, to know the data, to get rid of the data, and so on. I would also envision if the GDPR comes out with linking rules, they would say the real persons have protection against linking. Here's something I'll tell you, Shanish. Every bubble I showed you today was not, in the eyes of the GDPR, a real person. It's what's known as a legal person. And a legal person is an entity that has an excuse to have a licensure that is divulgeable, right? It's a business. It is a dog walker, right, who is behaving as the legal entity with different sets of rights. So to the extent that the GDPR says, look, if you're a legal person, if you're a company or an independent sole proprietor or a gig economy worker with an Uber driver's license, you have fewer protections than if you are that same person without that license. Now, do you see what the problem is? How does Bob, the Uber driver, have less protections than Bob, the homeowner? I'm the same Bob. In fact, my business is registered at the same address. It's my home address, right? But the moment I put on that cap and go out, my data protections are different. What I just illustrated to you, Shanish, is that's not an answer, right? That's a problem when you think about it. Canada is further along, and the new regime, I think, there's lots of debates now over what kind of content can be streamed and who owns it and who is me and so on. But setting that aside, Canada has a better position to be closer to the European regime and the California regime. So California has put some data protections that rival the European protections. Canada is a little bit lower, but I think Canada's going to leapfrog. Boy, that was a long answer, and I'm sorry. But your core question, does it make it more difficult in Canada? Yes, and that's a good thing, right? Because real persons should have that protection to be able to be forgotten.
Excellent.
If you want.
Well, we've got 7 minutes, and Bob, I know you wanted to talk about the new exciting initiative in Niagara about training.
We do actually, and that's good. But just before we hit it, are there any other questions on things that we can talk about? Ushnish, you have your hand up again, or is that did you forget to take it down?
There you go. Okay.
Okay. So just to close out, this is, I mean, I feel I'm among friends and family here. Paul and Connie and several folks have really been with our company from the beginning. It's been very exciting. And hopefully it's interesting for you to see the growth, right, of this sort of endeavor. I think we always felt that there was a promise for this, and it's neat to see it come forward. One of the things that we've decided to do as a company, we've been built on this notion of training young folks, right? Interns, co-ops. It's so exciting to be in that in Canada because the US doesn't have quite the same program, I think, that the Canadian universities. We get so much when young folks come in and kind of look at things and kick the tires. We also think that there's valuable and vital work for folks to do at the beginning of their career. So this summer, we asked a special person who just asked one of our questions, Lee, to join our company over the summer to run what we're calling the Robot Training Academy. And this tunes primarily towards university students. We do have probably 10 high schoolers, and we wouldn't turn anybody away who wanted to join. But basically, we want to teach people what we do, how we find data, what kind of use cases there are, and how to be protective and ethical with data. And then we give them a chance to do some work for some of our clients. And what's interesting in this is, you know, you've got somebody who's just starting their career, they need a resume boost. So, you know, part of this is to say, look, you just worked for, I won't name the company, but you worked for this government agency to help them solve a problem with fraud. Interesting, right? That's a great thing to have in your resume. So it's kind of an open invitation for you, and you can go to our website related to, and we talk about it. And if you're truly interested, get in touch with Paul and we can send you an email of the people to contact. But it starts in a couple of weeks. It's a 6-week program for people who are doing it full time. But we do have options. We have some university students who are just taking one class, maybe on a day, and then they'll go do some work. The end result is you get certified as a data explorer or somebody who knows how to do Python or whatever things they are. And then from there, you can take that as kind of a feather in your cap and a little bit of a resume hit. It's fun for us to work with folks that are at that stage in their career. So if you know anybody, please let us know.
That's great. Thank you very much, Bob. That sounds like an excellent opportunity for people at, I think, pretty much any stage. I mean, data is just becoming so important to just about every industry and profession that I think no one could fail to gain some traction or renewed traction as a result of this training. Thank you. Yes, I was going to share my screen, and now you've gone and made it convenient for me. So this is where I make my pitch to everyone gathered today to join as a member, as a founding member, because we are still in our first year until September the 14th, the Canadian Open Data Society. You'd get full rights to vote at our annual general meeting on the 14th of September. We are looking for new board directors at that time, and also committee members. We like them to be members. It's only $5 Canadian a month. Very reasonable, and we often offer breaks for active participants who contribute labor, such as, for one thing, editing the recording from this so that it will be preserved for the ages. And we are giving a break on our national summit, our Canadian Open Data Summit, taking place in Montreal right after that, September 15th and 16th for members. It's already going to be a virtual conference, so a lot less than you would normally pay. Like, I think it's going to be, for an early bird rate right now, it's $50, and it's less than that for members. So if you have any questions about that, I will put my email address into the chat. I think it's also available as a return address on the Eventbrite emails that I have been bothering people with last night and today to make sure that everyone had the right Zoom. And I'm glad to see that so many did. This has been an awesome presentation, very rich. And I'm going to be going back and looking at this or that slide over and over, partly in sheer admiration, Bob, and partly because it's sparking ideas for what we might advocate or what we might pursue. I myself, being a business consultant, could go in some of these directions. although my interests are maybe a little different, I probably wouldn't do the things that are in here, but again, it sparks ideas. So with that, unless anyone has any other questions or comments, with 2 minutes to go, I'd like to bring these proceedings to a close with grateful thanks to Bob and Melissa from Rel8ed.to for bringing us this, this wealth of information and insight. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye now.